Welcome to New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. I'm your guest host for this show, Mark Warden. I'm a state rep in Goffstown and serve in the legislature with John Burt, who I must say does a fine job for all of his constituents there at the state capitol. So I appreciate the opportunity to step in for John today, and thank you for watching. We're very pleased to have a special guest with us this evening, Kevin Bloom. He's an entrepreneur, political activist, and currently the political director of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here. It's nice that summer's coming up, spring, the whole thing. We're going to have to turn the fireplace down a little bit, cool the place off, air it out. I'm sure it'll be.
We're ready for that.
Well,
thank you for joining us on New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. I know you know John as well, and
yes.
Why don't you tell us, first of all, a little bit about the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. I know you're on the board of directors there. Tell us what they do and what kind of good work they do for the people of New Hampshire.
All right. Well, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance does a number of things. And the big thing it does, well, there are a couple big things, but one of them is the gold standard, and I think you have a copy of it here. Can I hold it up? I know you're really prepared. It looks something like this, and people that have that see it, you can either get a copy of this absolutely free online in PDF form on our website, and legislators get it before they vote. And what it does is it tells them what we think they should be voting on and what we think they should vote. In other words, ought to pass or inexpedient to legislate. And sometimes they take our advice and sometimes they don't, but at least we put a position out there. There are so many bills that come through that oftentimes people, and especially the general public, has absolutely no idea of what's being passed, and then they'll hear about it later and say, oh, this is horrible. Gosh, why didn't we know about that? Well, this is how they can find out about it, is they can see all the bills before they're voted on. The other thing we do is that we go into committee hearings, and we actually tell the committees in both the Senate and the House how we feel about different issues. And that's where we invite citizens to participate. To that end, one of the other fun things we do is we have testimony training, because a lot of people are, let's face it, pretty shy about going into a very official looking room with a microphone and sitting on a table, and there's this big group of people sitting around you, maybe 18, 20 different representatives who are, by the way, just by and large normal people. They're not judges, and they're not going to say, will the defendant please rise? They're just going to, you're just going to sit there and tell them what you think, essentially. And
so you help out the average citizen, the voters out there, to be effective, teach them how to be effective and go up and testify at legislative hearings, right? Not be afraid, not be intimidated.
Right, and the best way to do that is to practice. So we have practice sessions, and you helped us with several of them, I believe, at the State House, where people could actually go in and people who are activists could go in and try out, look at different bills and find out what they thought.
Well, this is a great service. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, because I can tell you, sitting on those committees day after day up in Concord, usually it's just a long parade of, let's say, paid lobbyists and bureaucrats and people from the executive departments asking for more money, asking for more special favors. So we rarely hear from the actual public, the people who are subject to all these new laws that get passed in Concord. So if you can help facilitate that at all and get more people to speak up and speak out, well, it's a true service to the state.
Well, people are real busy, and the hearings tend to be, as you've pointed out, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it's not like people can come in on their day off, and it really takes something for people to come in and speak. Even business owners that are directly affected by this legislation have a tough time. And we also do a bill review training, and that is where we'll go through some laws that are coming up or that have already been passed and say, well, here's what it looks like, and you can find all this as close as your PC. You can get on the computer and you can see what's coming up, what's going on, where the House calendar is, and we show people where the resources are. It's very simple, but if you haven't read a law before, it's sometimes a challenge.
Okay.
Because it looks, I know when I started, the law is a big thing. I mean, it's very, very big, and if you got it in a book form, which no one does hardly anymore, I'll just digress a second, and our attorney's office has some of the revised statutes annotated and they're in book form, and the one for 1858 is about that big. So now they're like a whole shelf if you got them in book form, but fortunately you can get them on your computer, and they're much more easily searched and things. You can find out when things were repealed and when they were put into effect, and what are these laws that you're expected to obey.
There's certainly no way everybody could know every law in the books at the state level, much less at the federal level. And John Burt and I have joked before that for every one bill that is passed in Concord, another one should be repealed, right? One of the old obsolete laws, because there are plenty of those on the books that just nobody knows about and nobody enforces.
Yes, and I think that one of the legislators, and I could be wrong, but well, I'm not going to mention who I thought it was, but suggested that we should sunset all the laws. Just some year we'll just pass a law that says all the laws are canceled and we'll start fresh and just write them as we go along. That would get rid of quite a few things that people don't know about right now. I think there are a lot more laws to remove and some bills that keep coming up on a regular basis. And one of the ones is there's usually a bill to make fireworks illegal that comes up from time to time. As you know, there's also the seatbelt law that New Hampshire doesn't have a law that requires you to wear safety belts unless you're a minor. Mm-hmm. And someone normally tries to change that. There are some very positive developments in the laws. You know, medical cannabis.
Oh yes,
came up. We have been trying to pass industrial hemp since 1999. Both Republicans.
So hemp, which is just a natural plant, that's illegal. Right, hemp, people don't even smoke it, right? It's non-hallucinogenic, but it's illegal in the state of New Hampshire.
Well, there's the bill that's come up. We have introduced a bill. It's HB 153, and right now it's going to be going to conference committee. It passed in the House. The Senate said, well, let's study it, and so there's a difference. It's going to go to the Committee of Conference, and they're going to discuss what to do about it. But there's some question whether hemp really is illegal or not, because hemp was specifically excluded from things that were illegal in the single treaty on narcotics from the 60s that was passed by the UN, which this country is a signatory to. And also when in the 1930s, I believe 1937, when marijuana was made illegal, they specifically said it doesn't include hemp. So it's realized that there's no THC, there's no narcotic in it. Mm-hmm. But now there have been a couple of court decisions that unfortunately that were contradictory, and one of them was a case where people who sold products made of hemp, such as shirts and ties and hats and socks and hemp oil, which is found in Dr. Bronner's soap, for example.
I've had hemp seed flour, and
sure.
I've seen that at the health food store.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can buy those, and the reason you can buy those is because there's a lawsuit where people that sold hemp products said, well, it shouldn't be illegal, and the DEA said, well, yes, it should be, because we get to regulate it because it's hemp, and the court ruled because it doesn't have THC in it, it's not underneath the Department of Drug Enforcement jurisdiction, so therefore it doesn't count. That was great. So that's why you can buy all this hemp stuff. And then the farmers came out, and they, in a different area, actually it was in another circuit, and I believe it was in North Dakota, and said, we want to grow hemp. Because right now, strangely enough, we're buying all of our hemp from Canada, and that's legal. Yeah.
It's my understanding that it grows fairly well in the northern climates, right? It could grow in New Hampshire just fine.
It does.
If you get the government restriction out of the way.
And it has, not only has it been grown in New Hampshire, it was actually required to be grown under the Crown when New Hampshire was a colony. Not only did you have to have it, but they had to buy it from you. So if you grew hemp in your backyard, the government had to buy your hemp, and they used it to make rope and all kinds of things. You can eat it, like the seeds. And for a long time, it was treated almost like a currency that you could pay your taxes in hemp. And some of the early records of the colonies say that that hemp was a big crop, and it was again during World War II. Battleships use it for rope and things. So the farmers came out and said we should be allowed to grow hemp, and essentially what the court said was, no, you can't because the government says you can, and so therefore your argument doesn't pass. So they were never reconciled. They were, I believe, the Ninth Circuit and the Fifth, and there was never a case that went to the Supreme Court where they fought it out. So on the one hand, hemp products, it's legal to have hemp products. It's illegal to grow the hemp to make them with, though. Maybe we'll change
It's unbelievable the kind of prohibitions we see every day, but it's really great what the Liberty Alliance is doing on behalf of some of these old-fashioned, obsolete laws, trying to change things for the better. Now, I understand that Liberty Alliance is, say, pro-liberty on every issue. But what does that mean? And are you guys partisan in any way?
Well, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance is a nonpartisan group. And what that means is that we have a very focused policy. We look at laws, when we look at them and say, well, does this increase individual liberty or decrease it? Does this make the state bigger or decrease it? Does this make taxes higher or does it make them lower? And we're in favor of lower taxes, smaller government, and less regulation of your individual rights and lives. So whether that comes down as a Democratic or a Republican issue is not really of any. We can work with both, and a lot of the issues we work with are bipartisan. So we enjoy, and that's great because that means really no matter who's in charge, there's always someone to work with, some issue that we can work on that we can find some agreement on.
Well, I can tell you that this is the gold standard is a really big help to those of us who sit in the legislature, because as you know, there are somewhere between 800 and 1,000 bills every single year that course through the Senate and the House, and there's no way to read them all. It's all you can do, just keep up with your own committee's bills. So if we are unfamiliar with some piece of legislation, it's really handy to have sort of a cheat sheet or voter guide or maybe a summary. We get a number of different sources on these bills, but this is one that can be trusted to always be nonpartisan and be principle-based. So thank you for your good work on that.
Oh,
now you mentioned the gold standard, bill review, testifying. Are there any other aspects to the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance that your members or directors get involved with, maybe that are non-political?
Well, yes, there's a Civic Action Committee, and it's a very simple concept, and that is that we want to promote charitable organizations that are not funded through tax funds. And to that end, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, well, they give checks to people who are doing good work in our community. And I think some of the previous recipients have been, there's a shelter in Keene, the Shire Sharing in Manchester, and Nashua, Concord, and there's some, I'm thinking back to some other good examples, and I'm thinking that there's a couple of soup kitchens too that are also recipients, that sort of thing. But if there's someone in the audience that has something going on and they would like us to send them a check, let us know. We're on the web.
Very good. Let's talk about some of the individual issues that you've worked on with New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and I guess also as a lobbyist. You've done that as a sort of professional lobbyist as well as a citizen activist, and maybe you can talk about a couple of the issues that have been near and dear to your heart over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. In fact, now, as you know, I've also done work for the lobbying firm of Rothbard, Sterner and Dobbs, and that's Manchester-based. And we do only issues that we agree with, and that was actually an offspring of working with the NHLA in the first place. So, of course, I'm not paid. None of us are paid at the NHLA. It's totally a volunteer organization. No one gets paid for it. And I might also mention that people that have the conception of lobbyists as folks that walk around with big bags of money, giving them to politicians, that's not actually true. We'd have to have big bags of money before we could. And that's kind of common. The lobbying is a work from, it definitely is something you do because you want to do it and not because it pays well.
Of course, in New Hampshire with 400 representatives in the House, it'd break the bank for anybody to try to influence all of them. Right, it's really impossible to bribe these people, at least in the House.
Yes,
because there's so many of them, and they're all volunteers after all.
That's right, and that's great. Really, people do these things because they want to, and not because they're paid to. And I don't know how many of people watching this probably do know that representatives and senators receive $100 a year, plus mileage and free tolls, and they get those license plates and a free parking place sometimes. But you had asked about some issues. The way I got involved with this is that I ran a brewery called Manchester Brewing back in, we opened in 2008 and closed in about a year and a half. And there were a lot of rules and regulations regarding brewing that were nonsensical. And I wanted to change them. And so I found out how, because I had volunteered for the NHLA. I learned how to change the law, and talked to you about the first bill that we ever did together was the nanobrewery bill.
Right.
And came up with a concept of what we wanted to do. And that was when it was the first time for me as a lobbyist and the first time for you as a legislator.
Right.
So that was great. And then Cal Pratt, too, jumped in, and we all got this bill together and took it through its paces. And it's sort of an interesting study of what people can expect if they want to do this, what you're going to run into. We came up with a very large list of reforms that we wanted to do in the brewing industry. And it started in the House. We went to first submitted it as a legislative service request, which is something that you can write in Word and say, here's what we want to do. And then they have a bunch of lawyers at the Office of Legislative Services. And they take that and they put it into, if you don't already have it in the format of the revised statutes annotated, which is the RSAs,
Right.
then they do that for you. And then you make sure that they say what you think they ought to have said and take that to the committee. And it's introduced. And you as the prime sponsor, of course, get to read it. And they listen to you, and then they ask questions about what's this going to do, and do we want to do this, and various arguments. People will come in and speak for it or against it. And the result of it was that we have nanobreweries now in New Hampshire, and we didn't before. And then the following year, we made some other changes. But and then after that, just this past year, in 2013, Governor Hassan signed the basically nanobrewery 2 law, which allowed for something that's closer to a microbrewery where the nanobreweries can sell beer over the counter now. And that was something that was in the first bill, didn't get passed, and I probably should back up and go, okay, you don't get everything you want, and then you have to go back and keep trying to fix it.
That's one of the interesting lessons we take from this, is that you can't get everything you want the first time through, right? Some of these issues take years and years and years. Medical marijuana, for example, passed earlier this year, but activists have been working on that for a long time.
Oh, yes.
Even something as simple as reducing the barriers to entry for small-time beer brewers took a lot of effort. But the nice part is you don't need necessarily a high-powered, expensive attorney or law firm to do it, right? You just need somebody who's energized and motivated and willing to spend some time at the State House and speak to the legislators. They are all very accessible, after all, right? Here, state reps answer their phones, state senators answer their phones.
Oh,
and you can usually get through to them.
okay. If you
I
say
know,
so, Mark.
I always answer my phone when
Yes, you do.
constituents
That's
call.
right. You're exceptional, though. You're not like other people. But some reps vary with their degree of involvement. And you mentioned that we do at the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, we actually rate the legislators. And one of the things we do is we publish a list every year and rate the senators and the representatives. So people can get online and they can actually download that and or look at it online and see where, and it also shows why we rated them the way we did. But we have a group of bills, and we say these are really important bills. And if people are voting against this bill, and it's a good bill, then we're going to ding them on that one. And if they're voting for it, then they get a big plus.
I love this. This is a great thing that you guys do.
Yes, it's and you've been our top legislator before, so you're a great example of how we like people to vote. So
well, it's easy really if you're voting by principle instead of party. If you vote always for more individual freedom, less regulation, smaller government, more self-reliance, then it's pretty easy to do the right thing. We brought a graphic that they'll put up on the screen here so people can get an idea of what that looks like for your annual Liberty rating. But it's a great thing that people can, I guess, get online through the PDF or get a hard copy if they want it mailed to them and see how their elected representatives are doing in the State House in regards to this issue of liberty. So again, we salute you for that, and we encourage all the viewers to order a copy. Let's take a small break right here, and we'll come back in a little bit. Thank you.
great. Thank you.
We are back. Thank you for watching. Tonight our guest is Kevin Bloom with New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. Kevin, we left off in the other part of the show talking about some of the bills making their way through Concord, through the Capitol. Thankfully, a lot of bad bills get stopped through the help of your organization and other good activists and just good common sense. Let's talk about medical marijuana. You touched on it earlier, and I want to know what other types of legislation, other bills are sort of related to that, and where the trends are going with New Hampshire legislation.
Well, nationwide, I think we've seen medical marijuana is legal in a number of states now, and New Hampshire is the most recent. And right now what's going on is a lot of people ask and write to, there's a New Hampshire, nhcompassion.org, and a couple of groups that have been really very important, Kirk McNeil, Matt Simon, and many others who have worked on medical marijuana. And now that it's passed, the state has a certain amount of time to establish regulations and set up the providers and the centers where people can actually obtain medical cannabis. It's not done yet, and there's no way, people can't get a card yet that says, hey, I'm one of those people who can, my physician has prescribed it, so I should be able to get it. Now, in the meantime, there's a couple of bills, and one of them says you can, in the meantime, before any of the centers are opened up, that you can grow 2 plants at home. And that one is up for consideration right now, and it's had its hearings, and it's working its way through the process. Don't know what's going to happen with it yet, but we'll see. We're hopeful that that one will come through. The other one is a decrim bill, and that one would reduce the penalties for possession of marijuana. The other one is HB 492, and I know nobody knows what the numbers are, so don't worry about it. But the one that nobody thought this was going to pass, but marijuana legalization bill passed the House, and that was by a very narrow margin. But it still did pass, and I don't expect it's going to pass the Senate, but still going to go that way.
So my understanding is that one you referred to there is also known as tax and regulate, right? It's a legalization bill,
yes,
but it's modeled after what happened in Colorado.
And Washington, yes.
And we really made news with that, national headlines, because it was the first time a state had passed legislatively a legalization bill. The other 2 states
did it by initiative and petition.
Yeah, right, through the process of a ballot initiative or a referendum, which some of the western states have, but we don't have that here in New Hampshire. So it was a big deal. It probably won't pass the Senate, but at least it passed the House. Right? So it was a really good showing and in keeping with the general feelings of the public and what we see with the survey results.
Right, the public is vastly in favor of, even amongst traditionally very older groups and people that are normally more conservative, there's still a majority in favor of either, well, first of all, medical cannabis, far and above, it crosses party lines and people think that's okay. Most people want to, now have had experiences with nephews, my nephew, other people's kids that have been arrested for very small amounts of marijuana, and they can't get student aid anymore from colleges. That really, there's no, and New Hampshire has great laws on the books. It has very good legal principles. One of them is punishment should fit the crime. It's actually written into the Constitution. But it doesn't work that way. You have to look at, is there a lot of harm from this, or are we going to, are we moving into a place where we're really costing society a lot more money, putting kids in jail, than we are doing any good?
I sit on the committee, Criminal Justice and Public Safety, that heard a lot of these bills having to do with marijuana. You mentioned decrim, that stands for decriminalization, which is slightly different from legalization, right? Decriminalization, I believe, means if you have marijuana, it's still it's on the books as a criminal penalty, but the idea is to drastically reduce the penalty from, let's say, a felony or misdemeanor down to a violation.
Right.
So it's still technically a criminal activity, right, but it's been decriminalized. It's not fully legal.
Exactly.
And what we did here in all these hours and hours of testimony was that from either a personal health or a public health standpoint, that alcohol and tobacco, cigarettes, right, both legal products, are much more harmful to people's health than simple cannabis use.
Right. And there are some unintended consequences, and that's what it's really more about. To me, it doesn't really, the whole cannabis question doesn't affect me personally much because I'm more of a beer guy. But what does affect me and affects everyone is the whole war on drugs. And it's been going on since really the most recent incarnation was Richard Nixon started it. And it was continued through administrations ever since. And basically, there's this war on drugs has been going on in other countries. For instance, the Chinese, for 3,000 years, opium has been illegal in China. Well, people still have it there, and unfortunately, it's still being grown in Afghanistan, so it's still a problem. However, what it's caused is there's been a rise in civil asset forfeiture, and this is something we're really concerned about. The ACLU is concerned about it. We're trying to stop it, have tried to stop it in New Hampshire. Again, this is a bill that passed the House, was shot down in the Senate.
Okay, yeah, I understand it fairly well. I was involved in one of the bills that we put forward to end that. But let's explain to the viewers. We talk about asset forfeiture, and then there's criminal side, also, but civil asset forfeiture. So this is when law enforcement seizes your stuff, right? Because they think you've committed a crime?
Yes, or they can merely charge you with it and charge you with the suspicion that your money, if you're carrying a great deal of cash, they can say, well, we suspect that you used this for drugs. Now, in colonial days, they would stop people, the colonists in New Hampshire, and say, the British would stop them, say, you must be smuggling because you have all this money. So we're going to take your money because you must have been smuggling, and then we'll keep it. So it goes way back to the king and witchcraft, and there are some other things that the king wanted some money. They would accuse you of a crime, and they'd take your money, and then as long as you didn't make too big a noise, then maybe you got to stay alive and not go to jail, and they kept your money. Okay, now fast forward. People have had their homes stolen, their cars stolen, their money taken, on mere suspicion. This is with no charge, no conviction. No one's been convicted of a crime, or even in many cases charged with a crime. And you have to sue to get your money back. There's no provision for you to get out of this mess. And this happens to people in New Hampshire. The Institute for Justice has rated all the states around New Hampshire with basically a B rating, and New Hampshire gets a D. So we have a problem with this, and we tried to address it legislatively. I don't know. We'll just have to keep doing it. Some years it's a bipartisan issue. It's not a Republican thing, not a Democratic thing. And we've found that in the last biennium, a bill went to interim study. It came out unanimously. The committee said, you're right, we need to get rid of this and do something. So, but nothing happened because it was the last year of the biennium. This year, it went to committee, and they just killed it. So it was.
I don't understand that. That is, as you said, a bipartisan issue. We heard testimony in Concord from a gentleman down in Massachusetts.
Right.
You're familiar with this story, and they seized his hotel. He got a note in the mail one day, said, "These are the feds. We're taking over your hotel. We now own it." And he thought it was a joke at first until he had his attorney check it out. And yeah, they were trying to seize his hotel, which was worth a little over $1 million.
Right.
And because sometime in the past there'd been, I don't know, a couple of drug deals in one of his hotel rooms.
Right.
So even though he'd rented out tens of thousands of hotel room nights over the years, they chose 4 or 5 as examples to use this civil asset forfeiture under the drug war laws to try to take away his asset. And it came out in his hearing in the long trial that he eventually won, by the way, that the federal prosecutors and some of the law enforcement acknowledge that what they do is they look around for all these drug busts, and they look at the tax records to see who has an outstanding loan or mortgage on it. And those that don't, those that have the most equity are the ones they go after.
Right, and there's a Motel 6 down the road had the same number of incidents where people had been arrested for something, and they weren't charged. They didn't try to take the Motel 6. Of course, that's a big corporation, have big pockets.
They had to hire the attorneys to defend it. Yeah,
right. And this is a family motel, and he had no mortgage, and the property's worth like $1.2 million, something like that.
Right.
And the Institute for Justice actually stepped in and took over his defense, and thankfully for that, because the estimates were somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 in legal fees. And people don't have that. I mean, and an attorney can't work for nothing either. You know, unless the chances that you're going to get somebody in there to do this for free are slim and none. And they can't afford to feed their families either while that's going on. So mostly what happens is they think that people will fold and just surrender their money or pay fines or something, even though they're not guilty of anything. And the response that we got from the law enforcement community was very discouraging. First, they said, we never do this, and also if you say we can't do it, we'll lose a lot of money. So that doesn't make any sense at all to anyone. But it's a big problem, and we're not talking about criminal asset forfeiture. Criminal asset forfeiture is very straightforward. Basically, if you go take your car and you rob a bank, they're going to take your car if they catch you.
Because you used it
in
the
a
commission
robbery,
of a crime.
right. Used it in the commission of a crime. And also if you stole the money from the bank, they're going to take the money because, well, it was the bank's to start with and not yours. But that makes sense. We're not trying to change that. There's a big difference between criminal asset forfeiture as a penalty and civil asset forfeiture, which no charges are filed. And all we are trying to say with the legislation is that, you know, you needed to, they have to prove it. That's all. Just prove it. That's all we ask. And that seems fair. We like to work. And if the drug war was over, I think would take out the major suspicion, the major cause of civil asset forfeiture would be removed.
Yeah, for anybody that wants to know more about that, they certainly go to Institute for Justice's website. It's ij.org, I believe. And they put out a great report called Policing for Profit.
Right.
Which points out the things you're talking about, how there are these perverse incentives for law enforcement to go after people, small-time drug dealers, or people even who have committed no crime, knowing that often they're not going to fight back, and then they can keep their stuff.
Right, and a lot of people, one of the questions, the things that's come up in the civil asset forfeitures, people were called in, the airport has called in people who tried to pay cash for an airplane ticket. And people who have then they've called in the police, and the police ask people, well, you know, are you carrying any money? And incidentally, it's not illegal to say no. And you should probably never say yes, because it turns out that's the wrong thing to say, because then they take the money, and your long nightmare in court begins right then. Because once it's gone, you're going to have to sue to get it back.
Yeah, and often it costs way more money in attorney's fees to fight them.
Right.
Than you lost, than the value of the money you lost.
Right, and law enforcement likes to say, oh, these are millionaire heroin dealers. However, nationwide, the average is between $1,000 and $1,500 that was taken by law enforcement. Not millions of dollars and not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but something that you might get from cashing a check, a paycheck, or selling a car, something like that. And remember, there's no charges filed. You're being charged with, not even being charged, but they're just saying there's a suspicion that you must have gotten the money from drug sales, which is just crazy. And we need to stop it. There's no place for that in a free society.
Absolutely not. Well, thank you for your work on that. And we'll keep pushing, even though it failed this year. We'll keep pushing, go back, find some good sponsors next year, and keep informing and educating the politicians, because they don't know much about it.
Well, thank you for all your work on asset forfeiture too, and that was we certainly can't do it without you. And
well, let's talk a little bit about First Amendment, free speech. So I know that's a big issue for you, even though it's a wide topic. I think you have a couple examples. One of the things that was bothering me this year was a bill that passed, headed up by the Democrats, to make it illegal to take a picture of your own marked ballot. So let's say you're in the voting booth and you take a picture on your phone. This is fun for me, right? If I voted for myself, I wanted to post that on Facebook. Hey, look, just voted for myself today. How exciting! First time running for office. Some people loved Obama, so they could say, "Oh, look here, I voted for Obama," or whoever your candidate is. Now to take that picture and send an email or to post it on social media like Facebook would be illegal. And I just thought that was ridiculous. Yes, there are some things about they don't want people to be influencing votes. Like you don't want an employer to say, well, prove to me that you voted for so-and-so and you can keep your job, right? So that's already against the law. It's already a felony, in fact, to threaten somebody's job or otherwise coerce them to vote a certain way. But just to take away an individual voter's right to show the world how he voted, I think is inane. Yet it passed right through the House, and it probably passed the Senate. So what are some of the other First Amendment issues that you're watching carefully?
Well, there are a couple of cases. One right now, there's a bill out to allow alcohol to be advertised on billboards. And right now it's just illegal in New Hampshire. There are some people who have looked at the law and said, I don't think really it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are, for example, if you're a restaurant, you've probably seen ad billboards that have restaurants on them. Oh, I can think of a few, and they're all fine
some of which serve alcohol.
That's right, and all of which serve alcohol, as far as I know, and even some that have a tiki bar, but they can advertise that, and they can say they have a tiki bar, but there's some. What happened was there's and by the way, a very wonderful beer place in Concord called Barb's Beer Emporium.
Yes, I know it well. Great place.
Yes. And they wanted to put a billboard up so that more people would know where they are after they moved a couple years ago, which was they used to be on Main Street. Now they're off on 106. But, and they had talked to CBS Outdoors, and CBS Outdoors said, well, we'll call the Liquor Commission. They called the Liquor Commission. The Liquor Commission says, no, illegal, because it's got Barb's Beer Store, and it's right in the title, and you have a logo of a beer mug. So that's illegal. Well, now, what they did was, legislatively, they took it to the Senate, and it was introduced. It passed the Senate. It said, oh, now it's legal now. Well, there are some very interesting developments that came from that, and during the testimony in the House hearing, this is pending now in the House, by the way, in the Commerce Committee, and some of what they said was the opponents of the bill came in, and they were other companies that maybe you've seen their trucks, and they said, gee, if kids see advertisements for beer, then they'll drink. And like there's not hundreds of rolling billboards all over the state. And I know you've been behind one in traffic before, so there's no question about that. Okay. The question turns out to be a free speech issue. It's the courts have pretty consistently held that the government needs a very good reason to deny someone freedom of speech. Now, back in the 70s, they were all after the tobacco folks, and they said, well, you can't advertise here, you can't advertise there. And then back up in the 90s, they started to change these rulings. The Supreme Court started to say, well, commercial speech may not be exactly the same as political speech, but it's still kind of important, and it's still covered under the First Amendment. So we're going to say you have to have a really good reason to deny people their rights, because people own companies like Barb or Burt or Gary's. These are individuals. These aren't huge corporate bodies that own these stores that need to advertise. They're people, just like you and me. They're family businesses, and I think that's going to come down to that. Maybe they'll either pass some kind of, I believe they'll reform the law, or there will be some kind of a legal action. And I'm certainly in favor of changing that law because we're all about free speech. The other thing was a label from. There's a law in New Hampshire that says you can't depict a minor on a label.
Cannot depict a minor on a label.
Beer label. Yes, a beer label. Now, there's some question about whether that means other labels, because if you go to the state liquor store and go look for pictures of minors depicted on wine bottles, you'll find them all over the place. And
we're not talking about gold miners or coal miners, right? We're talking about youths.
Yeah, well, they're actually
little cherubs, little
something.
Innocent children.
Yeah, and the Holy Family, right out. Can't have that either. But I don't know if that's an example. But there have been some cases in Maine that were the Liquor Commission. One was called the Santa Butt controversy, and it had a picture of Santa in it. And this is not a Santa not bearing anything. The butt refers to a barrel of beer, which he's sitting on. Okay. But it says that the case that was filed by the ACLU said, well, you can't. They denied. First of all, the Liquor Commission there denied them this label. And so they brought suit and said, the reason they had denied it was because it could influence children to drink. And I really look at this, and we're going back. We get this again and again. And just for the benefit of the audiences, whenever you're proposing legislation, you're going to be confronted with 3 different reasons why your solution to the problem is bad. Number 1, we've always done it this way. Number 2, your way will cost too much. And number 3, think of the children. So if they have to play all 3 of those cards, they're basically have a nonsense argument. But this is one. The argument that a child that sees a picture of Santa will drink beer is tenuous at best and really hard to prove if you think about it. anyway, moving right along, the Liquor Commission, when faced with this lawsuit, said, okay, you're right, we'll give up, and just dropped it. There's a flying dog case. This happened in Michigan where the Liquor Commission said you can't have this case. Now, you can't put a picture of, and it was a dog, and it's kind of, we're not going to talk about what the name was, but it was a raging female dog, and with the name usually associated with the female dog. Anyway, you can't have that on the label because think of the children. And what happened during this case, while they were actually suing, the Supreme Court took a case, and it was a health case actually in Vermont, but it was about advertising. And the Supreme Court came down so heavily on the presumption that you should be allowed to advertise that the Liquor Commission in Michigan said, okay, never mind, we're not going with that. We'll drop it. So they did, and they let the label through. New York has another one called Bad Frog. This is another great decision, but this one goes back a ways, and went through a couple of different levels of appeal before it got to the circuit court. And this was when the Bad Frog beer had a frog giving a fairly, an example of a frog basically flipping off the audience. And they said, well, this is bad for children. It's, I'm not sure what the word, vulgar. It's vulgarity. So the court, the first time, the court said, yeah, okay, the state can regulate things that are vulgar or something. And then when they appealed it, the appeals court said, excuse us, but you could try something else before you ban labels. Before you ban speech, you could say, well, if children are going to watch it, if they're in the store, first of all, why are they in the beer store? But secondly, you could put it behind something. You could use something less intrusive to keep this from happening. So that was, the courts ruled in favor. Now in this case, we have Founder's Breakfast Stout, which has a picture of a child eating oatmeal, not drinking a beer. However, New Hampshire has a law, and it says you can't depict a minor on a beer label, as we said before.
Right.
Okay, now it hasn't been questioned. Really, it's pretty rare. I mean, because you don't see minors depicted on labels. But in this case, Founder's Breakfast Stout, which is one of the top-ranked stouts in North America, and it's really good.
It is delicious. I've tasted it, yes.
And go to Massachusetts and buy some. And now I'll tell you another odd coincidence, but the argument came up. And normally this doesn't surface. No one notices in New Hampshire this. Well, in the Founder's case, they wanted to sell their beer here. They can't because of the label. Now there's a bill that says, let's get rid of this. So we bring it in, and the argument is, think of the children. Children may look at this label and be forced to drink. And really, aside from all of the arguments that are in court, all the court cases where they've said, you really need a compelling reason to censor people in advance. And that's what it is. It's censorship before the fact. Mm-hmm. You really need a reason, but the argument on the other side is that if children see this, they'll drink. If somehow a kid has to look at the stout in your fridge, against their parents' wishes, and open the bottle of beer and try some. Well, I think they're going to spit it out because kids don't like stout. It's an acquired taste. It's like scotch, They're just not going to like it.
Right.
And if you drink a whole bottle of, I just can't see a kid drinking a whole bottle of stout.
And the fact is that all these licensees that sell liquor, whether they're bars or liquor stores or grocery stores, they're all very heavily regulated. They know they're going to lose their business license and have their business shut down if they sell to minors, right? They self-police. So regardless of what's on the label, it's sort of nonsensical to think they're going to sell more to minors, or minors are going to be more compelled to buy this stuff just because of the label.
Well, the other thing is that, yes, but it's just on a label because Founder's Breakfast Stout is sold in restaurants across New Hampshire, except can only be sold in a keg. They can't put it in a bottle. It's got the label. But what they do is they have these posters with the same picture that's on the label on the front door of the restaurant. So are you more likely is your kid more going to walk into a restaurant and order a Founder's Breakfast Stout because they saw it on a label? No. They also can't go into a beer store and buy a 4-pack of Founder's Breakfast Stout, but it gets to the very ridiculous really fast.
Wow.
It's just,
well, you certainly have your work cut out for you as a lobbyist and as somebody who stands up for freedom. So thank you very much for joining us today on this show. I've enjoyed having you. This is New Hampshire Politics with John Burt. We want to thank our guest, Kevin Bloom from the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and keep on living free.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about all these fun things.
Thank you.